Do you ever walk into a room and feel like you're already on trial? No one said anything, no one looked at you the wrong way. But still something inside you stiffens, you adjust how you walk. You edit what you're about to say, you perform just slightly, as if there's an invisible courtroom watching and you're being measured. Most people feel it. Fewer talk about it, but almost no one knows what it really is. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who mapped the architecture of the human psyche, believed that our obsession with others' opinions reveals something far deeper than insecurity. He believed it reveals a fracture inside the self, a split between who we are and who we think we must be to survive. He called it the persona. It begins as protection. You smile when you're hurting. You say I'm fine when you feel lost. You become agreeable, clever, competent, because somewhere along the way you learned that being real might cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. Love, approval, safety. And at first the persona works, you're praised for it, rewarded, maybe even admired. But over time you forget where the mask ends and you begin. You think you're anxious because people are judging you, but Jung saw it differently. The fear you feel in their gaze isn't about them, it's about the version of you you've built to protect the one you've buried. When the persona hardens, it becomes brittle. You lose access to your truth, your voice, your preferences, even your presence. You become an echo of the room you're in. Jung once wrote, "The man whose interests are all outside is never satisfied." Because if your identity lives in the reflections of others, you will spend your life adjusting, apologizing, shrinking, hoping to be chosen, never quite choosing yourself. There's an old story that fits here. The emperor, so obsessed with appearing powerful, walks through his city naked, cloaked only in illusion. The crowd sees it, but no one says a word. Until one child speaks, and in that moment, the illusion breaks. That child, that voice, is inside you, the one who still sees the truth. The one who remembers what it felt like before you learned to perform. The one who never wanted to disappear behind the mask. That voice is not weakness, it's the self, your real self, knocking from beneath the persona, asking to be remembered. And maybe that's why you feel so uncomfortable in certain rooms. Maybe you're not afraid of judgment. Maybe you're afraid of being seen, not as the polished version, but as the one beneath it. But here's what Jung believed: beneath the mask is not emptiness. Beneath the mask is not shame. Beneath the mask is the beginning of who you really are. There's a kind of applause that feels like a wound. People praise you, admire your strength, your calm, your perfection. They say you're so composed, so impressive, so good at keeping it all together. And you smile, you thank them, you nod. But something inside you aches because you know they're clapping for the mask. And the mask isn't you. At first, the persona felt like freedom. You could choose who you were. You could shape how you were seen. A little self-editing went a long way. Smile more, feel less. Say what they want to hear, hide what they wouldn't understand. You became a version of yourself the world would applaud. But the applause never reached the parts of you that were real. It echoed in the room, not in your bones. Carl Jung called this the danger of over-identification with the persona. Not because the mask is evil, but because we start to believe it's all we are. And here's the tragedy: the better you become at being who they want, the more invisible your truth becomes, even to you. You laugh when you want to cry, you stay when you want to leave. You succeed and yet feel like a ghost in your own story. You go to the party, you turn it on, charming, witty, gracious. But you leave with a headache and a hollow feeling you can't explain. You wonder, if I take off the mask, will anyone stay? Will anyone clap for the version of me that isn't curated, filtered, agreeable? This is the obsession underneath the obsession, not just do they like me. Oh, but would they still love me if they saw the parts I hide? The fear isn't just of judgment, it's of disappearance. Because if they only know the performance, who am I when the stage is empty? Jung warned that this mask, if worn too long, doesn't just protect you, it devours you. You stop hearing your own thoughts. You lose the instinct to speak up when something feels wrong. You confuse likability with love. And every time someone applauds the mask, the real you shrinks just a little more. Until one night, lying in bed, you realize something terrifying. You've spent your life being everyone else's idea of enough, and you don't know what your enough even looks like. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop performing, really stop, you don't become less lovable. You become magnetic. Because people can feel truth. They can feel when you're speaking from soul, not script. They can feel when you're no longer trying to be impressive, just real. The people meant for you won't need the performance. They will recognize your silence as sacred. They will feel your presence, not your polish. So take off the mask, not to be loud, not to be different, not to be dramatic, but because it's time to come home to the version of you who never needed fixing, to the self that doesn't chase applause, to the soul that already knows you were never meant to survive behind the performance. You were meant to be free. You walk past a group of people laughing. They don't look at you. They don't say your name. But your stomach drops anyway. A voice whispers in your mind. They're laughing at you. You replay what you said earlier. You hear your own tone. You scan every expression. You try to prove something that no one accused you of. And here's the haunting part. They weren't thinking of you at all. Carl Jung called this projection. He believed that when we suppress parts of ourselves, our doubts, our shame, our grief, they don't vanish. They look for a screen, and most often that screen is other people. You think they're judging you, but really it's your own buried voice speaking through their imagined eyes. You don't see them. You see a reflection of the parts of you you cannot yet hold. That's why a passing glance can wound you, why silence can feel like a scream, why you carry a courtroom inside your mind waiting for a verdict that never comes. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but it's more than irritation, it's fear. The fear that someone will confirm what you've quietly suspected about yourself all along." Projection isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. It turns the world into a hall of mirrors where every surface reflects not who others are, but what we're hiding. You say, they don't like me, but maybe you don't like the part of you they unknowingly reflect. You say, they think I'm a failure, but maybe it's your own unhealed shame you've cast onto their silence. This is the trap. We try to change how others see us while ignoring who we've become inside the lie. And it gets exhausting because you're not managing relationships, you're managing reflections, not connecting with people, but dodging the shadow you placed on their face. It's not your fault. You learn to fear your own depth because somewhere along the line, being fully yourself was met with judgment, rejection, or abandonment. And so you split. One version of you went forward, acceptable, curated. The other stayed behind, rejected, quiet, unintegrated. But the part you buried didn't disappear. It waits in the wings of every interaction, hoping to be seen, but terrified of being exposed. This is why the obsession with what others think cuts so deep. Because it's not really about them, it's about you, facing yourself in someone else's imagined gaze. But here's the miracle. Once you begin to reclaim what you've disowned, the mirrors start to break. Their opinions soften, your anxiety fades, the imagined judgment loses its grip. Because you're no longer trying to outrun your shadow. You've turned to face it. And what once looked like shame now looks like truth. You're not afraid of what they think, you're afraid of what you think when no one else is around. But the moment you own your reflection, the mirror stops lying and the world becomes clear again. But before the mask, before the mirror, there was a child. Not broken, not anxious, not fragmented, just present, alive, unfiltered. That child asked questions, laughed too loudly, cried without shame, spoke the truth before it was edited. And then one day someone flinched. They told you to quiet down, to toughen up, to grow up, to behave. And in that moment something broke, not in your mind but in your trust. You learned that being you came with a cost. So you made the only choice a sensitive soul could make. You began to adjust, you read faces before reading books. You studied moods like survival guides. You discovered that safety came from not being a problem. Carl Rogers, one of the great voices in psychology, called this the beginning of conditions of worth, the belief that love must be earned. That you must be good, kind, helpful, calm, brilliant, attractive, funny, or else disappear. And from that seed, the obsession with what others think was born. Because when love feels conditional, perception becomes oxygen. You scan the room not for connection, but for approval. You don't ask, do I like me? You ask, did I upset them? Did I say too much? Did I take up too much space? People call it people-pleasing. But let's name it honestly, it's trauma wisdom, it's emotional camouflage. It's the genius of a child who decided that being accepted was safer than being whole. But over time, that strategy becomes a kind of spiritual suffocation. You start to lose yourself in other people's comfort. You say yes while your soul screams no. You feel seen but not known. You wake up wondering who you've become and why the mask is so heavy. And here's the cruel paradox. Even when you're praised, even when you're liked, even when you're surrounded, you still feel alone. Because the version they love isn't fully you. But the child is still there, still waiting, still watching, still hoping that one day the performance can end. That one day someone will see the real you and stay. That someone is you. You are the one who can walk into the memory, hold their hand and say, you're not too sensitive, you're not too much. You don't have to earn your place anymore. I see you and I'm not going anywhere. This is where the obsession with others begins to unravel. Not by forcing confidence, not by faking detachment, but by returning to the first rupture and offering it love. Because healing doesn't come from becoming someone else. It comes from becoming who you were before the world taught you to hide. And in that reunion, you remember you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. And that wholeness was never in their opinion. It was waiting right where you left it. At first, it just feels like exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep cures. The kind that follows you into conversations, into celebrations, into moments that should feel like joy, but don't. You keep showing up, polished and put together, but something inside starts to crack. You feel disconnected from your own voice. You laugh on cue, but the laughter doesn't sound like yours. You're praised, even admired, but somehow it doesn't land, and then it happens. Not with drama, not with fire, just a slow, quiet moment. You say something honest, you break the script. You stop smiling when you don't feel like it, and everything shifts. You feel exposed, not rejected yet, but naked, new, untethered. Carl Jung called this the breaking point of over-identification with the persona. The mask you wore to survive starts to suffocate you. Not because it was bad, but because it became a substitute for who you truly are. And when that mask begins to die, it feels like the death of your place in the world. Because the persona kept you safe, it made you likable. It got you this far, but Jung knew what came next. Individuation, the sacred unraveling of who you became to be accepted, so you can return to who you were before the performance. And yes, it's terrifying. Letting go of the mask feels like walking into a room without armor. It's cold, uncertain, vulnerable. Every instinct tells you to reach for the mask again, to smooth your tone, to shrink your truth, to apologize for existing too boldly. But that fear is the echo of the old self dying. You will say something real and regret it. You will disappoint someone and fear abandonment. You will feel for a moment like you've lost everything. But here's what you're really losing: the life you built around who you're not and what you're gaining. is yourself. This is the pivot point, the sacred death that precedes real life. The persona doesn't fall off all at once. It fractures in the silence between texts, in the ache of performing intimacy, in the dissonance between their praise and your emptiness. And then you stop pretending, not to rebel, not to prove anything, but because your soul is finally louder than your fear. You begin speaking without calculation, you rest without guilt. You leave rooms that require your silence to stay, and something unexpected happens. You stop trying to be seen, and people start seeing you. Not the version you edited, but the version you almost forgot was there. That is the turning point, not a reinvention, a re-emergence, not a power move, a resurrection. And yes, it will cost you. You may lose proximity to people who loved your performance. You may disappoint the expectations you once trained others to have. You may feel for a while very alone. But what you'll gain is peace. The kind of peace that can't be bought with approval. The kind of peace that only comes when the war between your truth and your image finally ends. You will realize, perhaps for the first time, that freedom was never about being accepted. It was about no longer betraying yourself to earn it. So let the mask die. Let it fall piece by piece. Mourn it, thank it, and release it. Because it did its job, it got you here. But you are going further now. What comes after the mask is not perfection, it's presence. You begin to wake up in your own life, not as a character in someone else's story, but as the author of your own. The obsession with how others see you begins to dissolve. Not because you've become detached or indifferent, but because you've become whole. Carl Jung believed that the greatest task of life is not becoming someone else's ideal, but reclaiming what you lost to fit in. This is individuation. The sacred return to yourself. The parts of you silenced to keep the peace, the truths you swallowed to stay liked, the dreams you shelved to be responsible, they start to come back. Not all at once, but in whispers. You speak without rehearsing. You take up space without apology. You feel joy without permission. You say no and trust that the people who stay are the ones who see you, not just need you, and the world changes. Not because it bends to your will, but because your lens is no longer distorted by shame. Their silence no longer becomes your story. Their opinion no longer becomes your mirror. Their approval no longer defines your reflection. You stop performing, you start relating, you stop adjusting, you start aligning. You become someone who can walk into a room misunderstood and still be at peace. Because you're no longer performing for clarity, you're living in it, and this is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the deeper kind, the freedom to be who you are. You realize that your value was never up for negotiation, that the applause you craved was always a substitute for your own recognition, that the mirror you feared was just waiting for you to stop hiding. So, if you find yourself still spiraling in their eyes, pause. Ask yourself, is this my truth? Or is this a reflection of a mask I no longer need to wear? And then choose to come home. To the child who once asked, am I okay? To the soul who once whispered, is it safe to be me? Let your answer be yes. Yes, you're okay. Yes, you're whole. Yes, you're allowed to live without shrinking, without performing, without seeking permission from those who never knew your name. And if this message found you, maybe it's because you're already returning to the version of you that was never broken, just buried, to the voice beneath the noise, to the clarity beneath the mirror. So let this be your beginning, not a performance, not a brand, not a mask, a truth, a presence, a sacred return. And if something in you finally felt seen, share it, not for validation, but as a mirror, for someone else still searching for theirs.